Phoenix Incandescent, Chapter 5, The Cufflinks. The hallways were filled with a mixture of sounds: snoring, the cry of a new baby, Sebastian's weary voice asking the last of his patients questions, and the occasional sigh from a guest missing the comforts of their own room. Charlotte slipped her cold hand into Beau's warmer hand. They walked slowly through the hallways, waiting. Beau wrapped his right ring around her and squeezed her hand, but he offered her no words. Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment and breathed in the scent of his feathers, airy and earthy all at the same time. They ruffled, and she let a giggle slip from her lips as a soft caress tickled her back. Beau kept his silence, but he smiled as he bent his head down and away from her. Charlotte turned her head to face the other direction and breathed slowly, pushing the rising blush down. Matches popped up in front of them. One of his shirt sleeves was missing, and a large cut ran up and down his arm. It was healing quickly. He flexed that arm and smiled. Almost good as new. "I'm glad," Charlotte said. She reached out and stroked the wound. "I'm so sorry." "Charlotte, you are as bad as your father. You spoil us so." "You spoil us," Charlotte countered. Matches dropped a pair of cufflinks into Charlotte's hands. They were gold and silver, and the faces had tiny working gears. Charlotte held one of the cufflinks to her ear and heard the tiny whisper of the gears as they turned. "They are your father's," Matches explained. His ears reddened, and he looked around nervously. "This is at my request." Charlotte fixed him a steady stare, but still the hob fidgeted. She knelt in front of him and put her hand on his shoulder. It was one thing for him to cause minor trouble around the castle, but theft from a hob's benefactor was a major infraction. She kissed his head and said the necessary words. "I take responsibility for this, Hob." The muscles in his shoulders relaxed a bit. "When you blow on them, they will glow, and you must think quickly of exactly where you want to go." "Okay. You can take one person with you at a time," he added. "You will need to be touching." "Thank you, Matches." Charlotte stood and shifted the cufflink slightly in the palm of her hand. He grinned mischievously. "We troublemakers need to stick together." Charlotte blinked and glanced down. "I'm not a... Do you remember when she asked Chime to take her up to the roof of one of the towers so they could watch for my family?" Beau laughed and nudged Matches. "It was a good thing my people have sharp eyesight." "I was young," Charlotte argued. She gripped the cufflinks in her hand and held tight. "Do you remember when she was learning how to drive?" Matches asked. "We had to keep setting up a new track farther and farther away from the castle." Charlotte placed her hands on her hips. "Okay, that's... Do you remember her making out in closets with a student of her father's because she thought she might catch magic?" Charlotte flushed. Her eyes and tone narrowed. "That's nothing more than a rumor." Beau snorted. "I remember you getting in a lot of trouble for a rumor." "You!" Charlotte stepped forward and then stepped back. "I!" She paced back and forth once across the hallway. Beau raised his eyebrows. "Who was he, Lottie? It's one of the castle's well-guarded secrets." "Ahem!" The proud, commanding voice interrupted the recollections. "I see my assumptions about you are correct." Matches popped out of sight. "Humph," Lodestar said to the empty air he left behind. "I will not hold up your little rescue mission for long, but I would like you to do something for me since you will be out and about." She pulled one of her long hairs out of her head and ran it along her horn. The strand of hair began to shine and turn a pearly color. She held her left hand out. "The cufflinks." "Why would you think I would hand over something of my father's merely because you rudely asked for it?" Charlotte demanded. Lodestar stared her down. "I am not accustomed to being challenged." "That's obvious," Beau said. He shrugged Lodestar's glare away. "I'm not used to having things that are mine or my family's demanded from me by a stranger." "Fine." She lifted her chin. "What is the Dane code of conduct here? May I borrow your father's cufflinks, please? I will assure their safety while in my hands and return them promptly." "I suppose that will be fine for a moment." Charlotte handed them over. "You know, the rest of the magical world shows a certain level of respect for Unitar." Charlotte looked Lodestar in the eyes. "It is the Dane way to want a person to earn respect instead of demand it. What do you want from them?" Lodestar opened a hidden compartment behind the face of one of the cufflinks. "It's a dragon scale. I would have thought it to be a griffin nail." She looked down at Charlotte and held the open cufflink for her to look inside. "What do you know about this?" Charlotte glanced at the shiny blue scale. "I didn't even know there was a secret compartment." "Well, of course there is." Lodestar snapped her hand back up and sniffed as if the very air in front of her was offensive. She traced the cufflinks with her pinky finger. "I will have my own sleuthing to do, it seems." Lodestar took out a pair of scissors from the bag around her human waist and snipped her hair into 2 pieces. Each piece went into a cufflink, and then she shut them both carefully. Charlotte tapped her foot against the floor. Dragons were a rare guest here. Typically, if we had one even stop by, they would come during the beginning of the new year. Father would stay up talking to them each time. He loved to hear their stories and adventures. Sometimes he would even use a spell to stay up later. Maybe that's what we should do, Bo yawned. Are you capable of being serious, boy? Lodestar snipped. He shrugged. Capable? Sure. Willing? That's another matter. Lodestar turned back to Charlotte. I am surprised. Dragons do not give a scale away very easily. Your father is an impressive man. While my father is an impressive man, it was likely given to my mother, or because of her. She has a way with absolutely everyone. I see. Lodestar handed the cufflinks back to Charlotte. You should have no problem getting past this building's protection spell now. Thank you. The cufflinks were warm in Charlotte's hands. What is it that you need while we're out? Lodestar placed her scissors back in her bag and brought out a small piece of paper. I require books from your father's library. We will consider this the beginning of a library loan agreement between our 2 libraries. Someday you may borrow from mine. Charlotte smiled before she could stop herself. She wasn't too fond of the Unitar, but she could put up with her in order to use her library. It's a deal. I trust that your father still has his backpack. Charlotte blinked. This Unitar knew much more than she let on. It's in the library. I'll use it to bring back the books. Good. Now go quickly. I will watch the end of the hallway until you leave. Bo tilted his head and walked a few steps away from Lodestar. Charlotte followed. She didn't want the nosy, loud Unitar to overhear them either. First, let's go to your father's library. It won't take you long to find the books. Once we find Raven or Ebby and return them here, we will be found out and may not be able to get back to the library. It's a plan. Okay, let's get out of here. Bo looked down both into the hallway. You were gonna have to hold my hand, Charlotte warned him. Bo sighed dramatically. It's such a rough life to have to be asked by a beautiful lady to hold her hand. Charlotte raised her eyebrows. I'm filthy, exhausted, and getting a little cranky. It becomes you right now, but we better finish the errand before you turn to a scary psycho beautiful lady. His eyes softened. Thanks for doing this. He slipped his hand into hers. That's what friends are for. Charlotte blew on the cufflinks, which began to glow a mixture of blue and green. She thought of the main double doors in the library, and with a flash and a tug they transported. The library was dark and still. Moonlight shone through the windows. Enchanted candles lit up as they passed the bookshelves. Charlotte handed the list to Bo and headed for the cabinets behind her father's desk. She pulled out his backpack and ran her hand over the soft, worn leather. Made by Joseph many years ago, it would hold an infinite amount of books and items, and it could shift into any kind of bag the owner wanted. She hugged it to her chest and then joined Bo to help him find the last of the books. At last, they stood before the glass doors that led to the side lawns. Where do we even start looking for Raven and Ebby, Bo? She coughed in an attempt to control her feelings. Do you think we might find my mother out there, too? Maybe she got away and is hiding. Bo reached out and squeezed her hand. I suppose there is that possibility, but I think your father would not be in the shape he is now if she were on the property. Some of the others are confident that he is straining to get through the shield to keep connected with her. Charlotte managed a nod. She blinked the tears out of her eyes before following Bo, who was headed to a closet his family had in the library. The wing guards had closets in many places in the library in order to organize their collection of wing boards. The one in the library was hidden behind a bookshelf. Bo put his hand on a specific spot on the inside of the bookshelf, which read his handprint, and opened the door into the small room that was packed with boxes and bags and boards. Bo pulled out a larger-than-usual board from the back of the closet. I thought flying would help us find them quickest. How will we see in the dark? Charlotte asked. Bo winked. With my eagle eyes. Honestly, Lottie, I swear you forget that I am who I am. Charlotte shrugged. Maybe I do forget the wings and abilities, but I do know who you are. Bo stared at her for a moment. Charlotte looked at the board in his arms. Is this one new? Yes, your father made it for my family to let Basil or anybody else surf the wind with us. I don't know exactly what else it does, but I figured this was an emergency. He turned her around and they both stepped on the board. The board stretched and grew shoe-like attachments around both their feet. Okay, cuff links again to get us right outside the door, Charlotte said. Here goes. Bo lifted off as soon as they were outside. Flying on the board felt safer. Bo wrapped his arms around her waist. Charlotte laid her arms over his. They flew slowly over the lawns, Bo scanning the ground carefully. Charlotte kept her eyes open for anything, but she knew her eyesight was laughable compared to his. It was quiet and still, and there were no flashes of light this time. She worried that they would be spotted by whatever enemy lurked in the grounds, but she was more hopeful that they would find those who were missing. "This would be fun if not for the circumstances," Charlotte whispered. "Why haven't we done this before?" "There was that puking incident," Bo laughed quietly in her ear. "You forget that that's strictly between you and me." "And here we are, you and me. I can talk about it. Just don't forget how you felt riding on Zarok." "And yet I kept it in," he laughed again. Charlotte was working on her next comment when Bo swerved quickly toward the outdoor stage. "I think I see a body." They landed and detached from the board. It was Raven. She was covered with scorch marks all over her body. Her dress was in shreds. Charlotte laid a hand on her chest. "Her breathing is so slow and soft. We have to get her back to the Hobbs now." Charlotte put the cufflinks in Bo's hands. "Take these and get her to Sebastian. I'll wait here for you." "I don't want to leave you." 2 enchanted cufflinks, 2 passengers. Charlotte sat back on her heels. Bo didn't budge. She nudged him. "Bo, you have to get her to Sebastian before it's too late. It's too dark to see her injuries, and there might not be much time left to intervene if she's badly hurt. Besides, you can be back quickly with the cufflinks." "Charlotte, if there's somebody bad nearby, then you don't have a way to protect yourself." "Then we are giving them more time to get to me by arguing. Go." "Fine, but I'll be back as quickly as possible. Don't do anything stupid." Bo scooped Raven up in his arms while Charlotte blew on the cufflinks. "Think of the room we came from." She dropped the cufflinks in his hands, and with a flash, he and Raven were gone. Charlotte looked around at the trimmed front lawns and the immense circle drive. She was on the right side of the lawns where the outdoor stage and stone benches provided a place for outdoor plays and concerts for the guests. On the left side of the lawns was a small stream and a bridge and a path that led to the gazebo. Sculpted trees and statues and lampposts were scattered about both lawns. She walked across the driveway and headed to the bridge, the windboard tucked under her arm. She used to love playing around the bridge as a child. She stumbled to a halt. Small bits of tutu were scattered in the grass. She broke into a run when she spotted a larger pile of tutu and a pale leg under the bridge. A scream burned in her throat, ready to emerge, but she swallowed it down. Relief and fear raced through her veins at the same time. She fell to her knees and placed her hand on Ebby's face. Her skin was cold. Charlotte wasn't sure if she was breathing or not. She was so distracted that she didn't even notice Bo until he had picked up Ebby in his arms. "I'll be right back, Lottie. Stay put." She stared blankly back at him. She felt so hollow inside. Bo gently placed Ebby on the ground and pushed Charlotte under the bridge. "I saw some people near the border on the right trying to get out," he whispered in her ear. "Listen to me, Charlotte. This is important. Stay put. Stay quiet. I will be back soon." He picked Ebby back up after blowing on the cufflinks and was gone in another flash. Charlotte hugged her legs under the bridge, shivering in the cold darkness. She wondered if this was what it felt like to be in shock, to be trapped in your own mind, unable to move. But she didn't want to stay trapped, so she forced her mind to stop paralyzing her body with fear. She grabbed the windboard and crawled back further under the bridge. "I thought I heard someone over here," a low voice growled. "Maybe those females are making a ruckus again. I thought they would have surely taken each other out by now." Charlotte shivered from both cold and fear. Bo popped up right in front of her, and she immediately put her finger over her lips. He nodded. Another male spoke then, a whiny voice this time. "Nah, it's the lack of sleep making noises in your ears. I was here earlier. Both were dead or almost there. Too bad that Raven girl didn't last. We need some more pretty-looking girls on the wrong side of the law." "Too bad we couldn't capture the little one she fought against. She would have made a pretty addition to our master's collection." A series of loud pops erupted in the air. Charlotte and Bo threw their hands over their ears. Charlotte started forward at the sound of familiar galloping, but Bo pushed her back against the bridge and held on to her. They heard a familiar voice. "The barrier is broken. Come now, dimwits. Feel fortunate that I was sent to retrieve you and that I bothered to obey." Bo pulled Charlotte into his arms and blew on the cufflinks. The flash and tug transported them back to the back room of the Hobbs' wing. Sebastian was barking orders at a few other Hobbs who were helping him tend to Raven and Ebby. Zarok and Lodestar were arguing in a corner of the room. Wilder stood near the door, his arms folded across his chest and his eyes locked with Bo's. "Father, they've broken the barrier. They're escaping now." Wilder nodded and left the room. Charlotte raced to Zarok, who looked like he might consider stepping on her. "Dane Weaver, now is not the time for apologies to clear your conscience." Charlotte continued anyway. "Zarok, I heard Ecos out there commanding others to follow him." Zarok rubbed his beard. "Ecos." He dashed out of the room, followed by Lodestar. The next hour was a blur as Sebastian rushed to try to save Raven and Ebby. Charlotte and the others were ushered out of the room. The Megard arrived and set up base in the castle. The Megard was made up of dwarves, who were small powerhouses of muscle. They carried a shield and a mattock, a weapon with a head made of a combination of an axe blade and an adze. Charlotte was allowed to travel back to her family's tower with Beau's family. While Charlotte's mother was missing and her father wasn't in any shape to parent, Wilder and Wynne immediately filled in the gap. She and Beau, young adults as they were, stood shoulder to shoulder in front of Wilder. It was definitely not the first time the two of them had been in trouble with either set of parents, but it had been a few years since their last major infraction. Wynne scolded them first, and then Wilder wrapped things up. "If either of you dares to pull something like that again, whatever Zarok decides to do with you will be the least of your worries," Wynne added as she and Wilder left the room. "We did the right thing," Charlotte insisted, once she and Beau were alone. "I would do it again. Forget Zarok." "Lottie," Beau laughed, "I'd do it again, too." He shrugged. "Sometimes doing the right thing still comes with consequences." Charlotte headed to the bathroom to take a hot shower. It wasn't right that everyone else sat around and did nothing and then turned around and got onto them for taking action. How did people do that? How could they look in the mirror every day knowing that they sat back when somebody was hurting? She scowled at her own reflection in the mirror. She pulled and tugged and ripped off the remains of the beautiful dress while the shower heated. The hot water felt good, and she turned the heat up as high as she could tolerate it. Suddenly a mixture of frustration and grief and exhaustion and worry smashed to her all at once, and she cried out. She covered her mouth and sobbed, her other hand pressed into the tiled wall as hard as she could. "You okay in there?" "What do you think?" she snapped back at him. He stepped into the bathroom. "I'm not looking." "Good. I don't feel like making your father any madder than he is right now." Beau sighed. "Lottie, he is furious, but he's also proud of us. You have to look a little deeper in his eyes to see it." "I think I might faint if I look any deeper in his eyes." "You obviously didn't get in as much trouble with him as I did as a kid." "You obviously got in a lot more trouble without me than with me." Beau laughed and left the bathroom. Charlotte wished she could somehow wash all the hurt that had been the last several hours away in the shower. She peeked out of the shower when she heard Beau rummaging through drawers. He tossed one of her swimsuits in the shower. "Put it on." "Ugh, this is an old one." "You're such a clothing snob, Charlotte." "Look who's talking." He knocked on the shower door. "Got it on?" "Yeah, I'm good." She opened the shower door, or her soul. She wasn't sure which. She was sure her eyes were red and puffy, for she hadn't been able to stop crying in between the words of their conversation. He stepped in and tugged a strand of her hair. "So what was all that commotion earlier? Girly feelings?" She tapped her foot against the floor tiles. "So what? You're fine after all we went through?" "Well, yeah, I may have smashed a few things in your room to get fine, but I'm good now. Maybe you should try it." "Beau, be serious," she chided him. "Do you want replacements or cash for the damaged property?" "Beau!" "Lottie," he replied softly. He tucked her head under his and wrapped his arms around her. "Just don't leave me," she said quietly into his shoulder. "Everybody else is leaving me." He held her until the water went cold. And that is chapter 5. See you next time.